Hello and welcome to my video detailing information on the Aldi Ferrex 10-inch bandsaw and my initial thoughts. Now this obviously is not a review because I haven't owned it long enough, so that's maybe one for the future. For orientation, we're in November 2021, it's the 29th, and this was bought from Aldi as part of their special buys, and as of filming this has been available for a week and I've just noticed that it has sold out, so this is obviously a popular item. Importantly, the model number on the unit is the HBS261. This is important as this shows this is exactly the same model as the bandsaw of the same name from Aldi released in 2020, i.e. the 10-inch bandsaw. And also the model number, or the actual model itself, is actually a Scheppach bandsaw of the same model number. So if you search for Scheppach HBS261, you'll see exactly the same thing, but in Scheppach colours. It's obvious that Scheppach have licensed the production and the sale of that particular bandsaw to Aldi. And having had a little bit of a look just at some videos of unboxing, assembly and specs of the Scheppach HBS261, I can actually confirm that it really is most definitely the same bandsaw, and there's probably manufactured from the same factory in China, obviously under that license agreement that I've mentioned. So, as with many Aldi products, the key point is that it's cheap. And it's obviously aimed probably more at the DIY hobbyist market, but the question is it worth it? Does it represent a bargain? Is it going to be reliable? Well, I guess first off we compare it to the same bandsaw in the Scheppach colours. It's around £100 cheaper. The Aldi one was sold at £149 plus an additional £10 large item delivery fee. So I think if you directly compare that to the Scheppach model, it is a bargain because you've saved yourself £90 to £100 straight off. I think in terms of comparisons to other models, let's call them for the DIY hobbyist, I think if you look at online retailers such as Screwfix or Toolstation, and what you'll typically find is there's quite a few models around about the £130 mark, but these have a much smaller cut capacity on the blade, and also the capacity for the actual throat of the bandsaw is much less, typically sort of 8 or 9 inches. I think if you wanted to try and compare this to, let's say, a model similar sort of hobbyist aim models but with a cast iron table, I think you would probably be looking at the range from Axminster, which is known as the Craft range. The one with the that's the 8-inch bandsaw, so that's obviously 8 inches from the blade to this upright, that's retailing at £260. So straight off that's £110 saving for this versus that. Obviously the trade-off is this doesn't have the cast iron table. And I think if you then compare it to the Axminster Craft, which is a 10-inch, so comparable in terms of this throat capacity here, but with the cast iron top, that comes at £420. So straight away that's quite a big difference to the £150 for this particular bandsaw. So I guess the thing is, if this bandsaw cuts well and shows reliability in terms of, let's call it hobbyist usage, not, let's say, professional usage where someone may be using this several hours a day, but more hobbyist usage, then this could well be a bargain. And I guess only time is really going to tell on this. However, you can, because obviously this is a rehash of not even a rehash, it's exactly the same model released in 2020, and also the Scheppach HBS261. Now I'm not sure how long that's been out there, but the likelihood is there's going to be forum posts out there, maybe even other videos which represent long-term reviews of this particular model bandsaw that will give you some idea in terms of long-term reliability. Okay, so in terms of specifications, etc., so the throat capacity is described or marketed as 10 inches. I think actually if we measure this out, it's actually 9.5 inches, slightly naughty, but I guess, you know, they've rounded it to 10. For those obviously wanting that in metric, that works out at 245 millimeters. In terms of the cut capacity, so for the blade. Obviously the specification says 120mm. Actually, by taking the band guide right to the top and the clearance from underside of the side rollers here to the tables around about 125mm, but you're not really going to be pushing things that close to the rollers anyway, so I think that's why they've said 120mm. The reality really is that if you have bought this because you're going to be typically cutting lots and lots of material at 120mm, this is probably not actually the bandsaw for you, even though it can do that. I guess really and typically you're probably wanting to be cut things that are at least half that size. Yes, you can cut something 120, but I would probably use those as one-offs rather than the norm itself. The table itself, excluding the extension table, which is there, is 300 by 300 or 12 inches by 12 inches. With the extension table, which is this piece here, which I haven't slackened it off at the moment, that adds an extra 80mm in terms of the capacity across the table. The bandsaw is described as being dual speed. Well, it is dual speed. It can actually operate at 2 speeds. There's 660 meters per minute and 960 meters per minute. The 660 is the sort of speed you want if you're going to be cutting hardwoods, or if you want, let's say, finer cuts. The 960, I guess, is for cutting softer woods and maybe for rougher cutting. It comes set up, or certainly minded, based on the 660 meters per minute setting. You actually adjust this, so there's no magic button or dial. You essentially have to manually move this belt here, change the speeds. So it's not, I haven't tried it myself, so I can't comment at this point how quick that changeover is, but just to make this obvious, this is not a single button press to change between the speeds. So not really a game changer really. In terms of the saw band itself, its length is 1790mm, which is 70.5 inches. It says that it can accommodate a maximal blade width or band width of 13mm, so that's essentially half an inch. Half an inch is 12.7mm. I've had a little look at some of the other bits which aren't really described, such as the, let's say, the capacity on the wheel itself. And the wheel, let's call it the wheel, the width of that wheel actually is around about 19mm. And in terms of the tyre surface that's on that wheel, and that, I've tried to measure it using caliper. It's a little bit tricky trying to get it into here and get it accurate, but it's about 13 to 14mm. Why am I talking about this? It'll become a little bit more apparent later when I come on to setup of the setup and tuning of the bandsaw. But yeah, it's just to really give that information that that's the size of the wheel itself. In terms of dust extraction, there are 2 ports. There's one large one on the rear, which serves this bottom, I guess, wheel assembly. Closed unit. This is quite a wide dust port. This is probably more for your typical kind of workshop type dust extraction system. That has a 98mm outer diameter. There's the second dust port, which is actually one of the ones you actually fit as part of the assembly. Based on the angle of this, it would appear that the dust, or certainly the attachment hose or the adapter for the hose, would go internally, and that has a diameter of 34mm. Now actually my own shop vac adapter is actually perfectly suited to that, and actually just fit in there quite snugly. And I'm pleased to tell you I have tested it, and dust extraction just by attachment via that dust extraction port on its own is actually reasonably good. So in terms of my observations, as previously said, can't do a review yet because I haven't owned it long enough, but just things that I've noticed. So I think first and foremost, the overall body seems to be of solid construction. There are no obvious mechanical defects. I can confirm that it powers on, it's not too noisy. And using a bit of some oak offcuts, it does cut, and it does cut reasonably well on the 660 meter per minute speed. In terms of things that I've noticed that let's say not so great, obviously please bear in mind this is a this is kind of budget into the market. So I think if you have an expectation that everything's absolutely perfect, you probably have the wrong expectation. But let's go through the things anyway. So one of the first things I noticed was there's this plastic insert in the table itself. Actually, the left-hand side of it was rubbing against the actual the blade itself, and was creating quite an issue. Now that's easily fixed. I've filed that down, so that was a quick fix. So not a game changer. I've also noticed there are some sort of out of the box. There are some minor dings on the tabletop itself. Again, they're purely cosmetic. They don't really do anything, so not a game changer. Also noticed on assembly, particularly on the runners just behind here, there are some particularly, let's call them sharp edges. Now again, using a file, that can be corrected, so again, not a game changer. On to the things which are, let's say, a little less perfect. The table itself. So if I put a straight edge down on top of that, it is actually reasonably flat across the table itself until you hit the point which is the right hand side of the table, or the bit that's right hand side of the mitre slot itself. If I run a straight edge across there, I'm hitting that right hand edge. You can hear it. Obviously telling you that this right hand part of the table is actually raised in comparison to that. So if you have a workpiece which is going to be spanning also onto the right hand side there, it means that once you've actually squared up the blade to the table, if you're doing it for this bit, if you're having a workpiece which is actually also going to there, actually this is not quite square anymore. And actually this issue gets worse as you move on to the table extension. So the table extension again has another, steps it up again very slightly. Now, let's be honest here, this is not absolutely massive. However, depending on what you're doing, I think if you were professionally creating things, this is going to be potentially a problem. Again, I think for the sort of things that I will be doing, this probably presents no problem. But I just want to make this absolutely clear. That tabletop is not flat against, is not consistent across the entire piece. In terms of the other one I noticed is the actual main fence itself. The main fence, actually when initially attaching it and using a square, actually it wasn't square to the table. There are some there's some screws that can be removed, and actually when doing that, this entire let's call it this cast section actually moves. Now I thought that would probably fix the problem. However, upon tightening these, it went back into the same offset position, so this probably needs a little bit more investigation. What I have done is I've actually just created a very temporary fix, which I use as part of my test cuts, where I've actually just inserted and glued something onto the right hand side of this runner, which raises the left hand side of this just high enough that allows the fence to be squared to the rest of the table. So this is just a bit of a temporary fix. I need to work out what I'm going to do to fix it. That could be replacing this unit for an aftermarket product, or it could mean that dismantling it completely and see if I can find out where the issue is and get it fixed. In terms of let's call it the auxiliary mitre fence. Now, I've owned various things like table saws, and these things are always rubbish. They are always have lots of slop. So that, to be honest, I expected. So it's no surprise of that. You can actually, if you're going to use this in anger, there are things you can do this to improve it. I mean, firstly, you could actually replace it with again a third-party aftermarket product that's got certain bits that you can adjust on this bottom edge that allow it to fill out and fit better to the actual mitre slot. And what you can do as a quick fix is I've used, and I did this with my table saw, some thin strips of aluminium tape. And actually cut thin strips and stuck them to the sides of this just to widen out this kind of this piece, just to allow it to fit a little bit more snugly actually in the mitre slot itself. And one other thing I have noticed, which is part of the setup and adjustment, is this left hand side roller here. Actually it doesn't turn as freely as the others at the rear and on the right hand side, and I've actually applied some WD-40 to this and it hasn't changed it, so actually it looks like the defect's internal to the bearing itself. So I may have to look at see if I can get a replacement part for that to allow it to. It does move, it's just not as free as the others, and I'm not really quite sure at the moment what the impact on that may be. So I may report on that as part of a longer term review. As this video seems to have got rather long, I'm actually going to conclude it here and call this a part one. A part two, we will actually look at just some of the basics around the assembly and the setup of this bandsaw, and we'll show some test cuts. But we'll put that in a part two, which I shall release relatively soon. Thanks for watching, and I hope this has been some use to somebody, and hope to see you in part two. Thank you.